Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Conservative Women's Network. Resuming after a 2-year shutdown because of Wuhan Chinese COVID virus. Yeah. I'm Michelle Easton, president of the Claire Booth Luce Center for Conservative Women, and we're delighted to host CWN here in our office for the first time. This is our new, expanded, renovated headquarters, and I want to thank you all for coming today. Special thank you to the Heritage Foundation and today's co-host, which went to Heritage by mistake, Katie Gorka, but she'll be here soon. We also have from Heritage Cora Wack, who is the assistant to Bridget Wagner, who is the vice president that we've worked with for many years on this now. We've done this for 20 years with Heritage. Then we had the 2-year stop for COVID. First with Becky Norton Dunlop, who was vice president, now with Bridget Wagner, and it's been a wonderful partnership between our two organizations. And we're looking forward to another 20 years. And thanks to you all for coming today, and to those watching on the videotape. We always get a lot of people who come on our website and watch it afterwards, and Heritage as well. We'll get the Heritage. I want to mention that the next CWN will also be here on April 8th. And we're probably going to talk about energy and rising gas prices. Have you filled your gas tank lately? Yeah. My goodness, there's a lot of policy mistakes by this administration and others that are contributing to what you're paying, and it's on the way up as well. So today we're delighted to hear from Nicole Neily, who will give her take on the current craziness in our schools and give us some ideas what we can do to make a difference. Nicole is the president and founder of Parents Defending Education, a nonpartisan, nonprofit national organization giving parents the resources and the support they need to advocate for their children's education. Since its launch last year, Parents Defending Education has broken dozens of really big education-related stories from coast to coast, including the one about the National School Boards Association letter vilifying American parents. Remember, you're all terrorists, right? Yeah. She's also filed over 300 public records requests with districts around the country. You got to find out what they're really doing through these legal requests, and submitted 8 Office of Civil Rights Division at the Department of Education complaints on racial discrimination, which surprisingly the Biden administration is not really interested in investigating, are they? And Nicole and her organization have helped over 22,000 parents submit comments to the Federal Register that makes a difference in the policy formulation, and has two open lawsuits going, one in New York State and one just settled in federal court. Prior to launching Parents Defending Education, Nicole created Speech First, and that's when I first met her. We came here and we sat and talked about it, a very important organization that defends college students' free speech rights through litigation and other means. She's also worked at the Franklin Center for Government, the Independent Women's Forum, and at Cato. In addition, she's worked in the private sector at both a crisis communications firm and a public opinion firm. She earned a bachelor's degree in political science from the University of Illinois, Midwest, good place, and a master's of public policy from Pepperdine University School of Public Policy. She's married for 11 years. She has 2 children, 7 and 8. And when I asked her what her hobbies were, she said, "I don't have any hobbies. I just work all the time." I can relate to that. This is the life of working mothers. So please join me now in welcoming to the Conservative Women's Network, Nicole Neily.
So much, Michelle. This is such an honor because when I first moved to DC, I went to these events at the Heritage Foundation. So this is like, mind-blowing for me to be up among, you have such luminaries who speak. So, my goodness. But I'm such a fan, so this is really exciting. As Michelle said, I got to know her when I was working on Speech First, which I started in 2017. Speech First sues public universities. We were only the bad guy. And so we have, over the 4 years it's been around, sued 6 universities. Actually, they just filed the 7th one about 2 weeks ago. And so I sued my alma mater, University of Illinois, as well as my husband's, University of Texas. They do still ask you for money after you sue them, which makes it very awkward. I know how much money you spent on Gibson Dunn. You're not getting $1. You know, it's been so much fun to fall into the education sphere, because when I worked at Cato, when I first started out in Washington, I did foreign policy, I did tech stuff, and I always said, you know, education, school choice, fine. And then, you know, I had kids, and it suddenly became very real for me. And so just watching what's happened on universities, one thing that really struck me when I was working in the university setting was how many students get to campus and they have no understanding of the First Amendment whatsoever because they've never received a proper civics education. If the first time you hear about the First Amendment is, this is why Richard Spencer can come to campus, well, you're not going to think it's the best thing in the world because you've never learned this is how disenfranchised groups throughout history have been able to change people's minds. It's how women, you know, suffragists were able to earn the right to vote. It's how we defeated Jim Crow. They don't know the beauty, the majesty of this. This is, Martin Luther King was imprisoned because he wrote letters from a Birmingham jail because he violated a gag order. I mean, these are really important things that our children are not learning, which really, I mean, troubled me. And then for me, when I started working on the Parents Defending Education thing, sort of percolating in my mind, in 2022, when schools shut down. My husband, who I know Mike knows, worked at the Institute for Justice for 17 years. He was a constitutional litigator. He worked on the Heller gun case, worked in the Kelo case, and he did a lot of school choice litigation. And so when schools shut down in March of 2020, I'm from Chicago originally, if you can't tell from my accent. We started getting texts and calls from our friends saying, I don't want the schools to shut down. How do I make them listen to me? It feels like they don't really care what we think. And we would sit in the backyard with a beer and say, of course they don't care. But it was really it was eye-opening for me to realize that so many people didn't know how disenfranchised they were from the system. They assumed that the system worked alongside them, not against them. And so I thought, all right, that's an interesting data point. My kids were in a Montessori preschool, so we didn't have any problems at the time, but I thought, okay, that's really interesting. And then obviously, schools were shut down, and we all started to hear horror stories from our friends about, Zoom classrooms were now in your living room. And during Zoom school, I think a lot of parents were justifiably horrified what they saw, what they heard, what their children were learning or were not learning. And then that all kicked into overdrive after the George Floyd murder. And we saw districts around the country sending these all-district emails, well, we are systemically racist, we are committed to being an anti-racist institution. What the heck is going on? I mean, when I grew up, I remember during the Gulf War, during the 9/11, schools didn't send out messages about these things. And so suddenly they were putting themselves into really highly politically charged issues. And so I think that was kind of a weird wake-up call for people. And for me, the thing that really flipped the switch when I said I have to start a new organization was in July 2020, the Wall Street Journal wrote a profile of a superintendent in a district near where I grew up, in Evanston, Illinois, where Northwestern is based. And he said he was going to allow black and brown children back for in-person education before white children in the name of anti-racism. And I started screaming my computer. I was like, you can't do that, that's unconstitutional. And I went to a friend and I said, I want to do speech first for K-12. I want to sue these guys. How dare they? And he said, yep, love it, great, we're in. But I think part of the problem is nobody knows this stuff is unconstitutional. I think you need to start from a different place. And I thought, that can't be right. I mean, I'm married to a constitutional lawyer. We have dinner parties, we talk about the 14th Amendment. My life is super boring. But, that there has to be resources out there. And so I started looking and I thought, you know what, actually, a lot of the information that's out there about your rights in school, it's in the higher ed setting. You think about the First Amendment, it's campus free speech. You think about Title IX, it's the kangaroo courts and due process on college campuses. You don't think about these things in a K-12 setting. And I know, obviously in Loudoun, there's been this horrific Title IX incident, right? We are watching districts sweep things under the rug, not upholding their obligations under the law. And so I thought, all right, well, if there's really kind of nothing out there, I guess I have to make this stuff. And so we started creating resources, just very straightforward things. I have always thought of, when I worked at Cato, I always thought of my job as translating wonk into English, and then when I did speech first, I thought of it as translating lawyer into English. My job, I don't want to reach the Acela corridor. I think of my target audience as Bob in Omaha, who, works a 9-to-5 job, and is seeing these handouts, and is hearing these lessons, and thinking, I don't really like this, but I don't really know why. I kind of have a gut feeling. I don't know what to do about it. It's very fraught. If you speak out and you say the wrong thing, when you talk to the teacher, when you get at your school board, you're the neighborhood QAnon person for all time. Nobody wants to be that, right? And so people really, for the most part, just kept their mouths shut because districts wanted them to, right? There were very strong signals. This is not your place. You keep your mouth shut. And so people were scared. So, okay, well, let's empower people. I'm a child of the 80s, and so I grew up watching, I have brothers, G.I. Joe cartoons. And there was always this thing at the end, it was like, you know, a life lesson, don't play with down power lines or something. But it was always, the saying was, knowing is half the battle. And I thought, that's it. Knowing is half the battle. Let's teach parents what their rights are so they know where the red lines are drawn. Yeah. So if and when those lines are crossed, and unfortunately now it's really more a matter of when than if, they know that something has to happen. And so we started just to put together very, very straightforward guides. What is Title VI? What is Title IX? What is the First Amendment? You send your kid to a private school. What are your rights there? It's super different because most private schools don't actually receive federal or state funding. And so your remedies are different. And then even, I mean, how do you get smart about these issues? There's so much information out there. What is Bob in Omaha gonna, you know, what's he gonna read? He's not gonna sort through 45 pages of new discourses. I mean, I love James Lindsay, but it's a little bit dense, right? And so what are the best articles that are out there so people can get smart quickly on these issues? We want to make it easy for people. You know, when we don't meet them where they are, they don't know who Barry Weiss is. They're not on Twitter all day. They're just trying to get on with their lives and like not get divorced or have a nervous breakdown after 2 years of a pandemic, right? I mean, and so we would just meet people where they were. And then also, I mean, we kept in mind social media throttling, right? I mean, you know, why would we spend a bunch of money trying to advertise on Facebook when they would just turn around and silence us? And so we tried to build up our email list, working with conservative partners to meet people where they are, meet them in their pocket. You know, you're sitting on the side of your son's baseball game, you could get smart about things quickly. And so that was kind of where we started to build things out from. As I was kind of building all of this infrastructure out, I got connected with a woman who some of you may have heard of, Asura, a local hero in Northern Virginia. And Asura had become, she calls herself an accidental activist because she was very involved in the fight at Thomas Jefferson High School, the magnet school in Northern Virginia. And she figured out, you know, when they were trying to change all the admissions process, that thank goodness our great new governor and our attorney general are rolling back as we speak, you know, that there was significant discrimination taking place. I mean, the things that their school, the superintendent, the admissions people were saying about, you know, these Asian families, these immigrant families needed to check their privilege, she was outraged. Asura is an Indian American Muslim single mother immigrant. And these are the people who have to check their privilege. I mean, it's appalling the kinds of things that were being done against us as, you know, as Americans with our tax dollars, you know, against our will. And so I got plugged in with Asura. She is a former Wall Street Journal investigative reporter. And so her heart was really in, like, let's dig into this stuff. And because she had a really significant Twitter profile, she had people who, as she was writing about these things, would reach out to her with tips. And so she initially said, well, I want to start a news outlet about education. It's like, the world does not need another education news outlet, but I think there's something here. And having worked in this space for, I mean, at this point, 15 years, I thought, I mean, my heart is in school choice, my husband has litigated school choice cases, and so I thought, I think there's a way to kind of overlay this. And so we decided to put all of our tips together on a map, because I wanted to show people that this is not just a California and a Manhattan problem. This is an everywhere problem. This is in red states, this is in purple states, this is in blue states. These are in public schools and private schools and parochial schools. This is everywhere. And once you know about it, then you can do something about it. But we want to give our friends air cover for this because, again, it's scary. You know, people don't, race has always been the third rail of American politics, and now we're moving into a whole gender issue. People are scared to talk about these things. But once you can say, this is the handout that fifth graders are getting, this is what we're teaching kindergartners, then it does give people a little bit of confidence to step up. Yeah. So we created this to expose all the bad deeds that are taking place. And then I thought, you know what, we don't solve this issue by, you know, on Facebook or Twitter. And frankly, like, I mean, my husband works at Cato, sorry to make fun of them, but like, you know, this war is also not going to be won by white papers either. Yeah. We have to get off the sidelines and do something about it. But what does that mean? I think, you know, and again, thinking about Bob in Omaha, he doesn't know what to do. I mean, I think so many of us in Washington and New York, our default setting is, well, I'll pitch TV, I'll pitch radio, you know, I'll write an op-ed. Normal people don't think that way. And so we wanted just to create very basic engagement guides. Asura and our coworker Marissa wrote guides on how to start your own parent organization, taking the lessons that they learned from getting the Coalition for TJ off the ground. They said, we use Telegram as our chat app instead of WhatsApp because WhatsApp has a limit to the number of people you can put in a group. I mean, they can kind of learn lessons along the way. I thought, well, that's really useful information. Most people don't think about the difference between a C3 and a C4 and a PAC. State charitable solicitation registrations. I mean, kind of all this stuff that is, it's very kind of ivory tower. But how do we get people off the sidelines and get involved? And I mean, again, we're at a very fraught moment in time, and so getting involved can mean different things to different people, and that's okay. We have people who send us tips to our tip line. We have a tip line where we receive about 100 to 200 tips a week still since we launched in March. Almost all of those are anonymous. That's doing something because Bob in Omaha doesn't know how to get something to Fox News or Tucker Carlson, but we do. We can shine a light on it. We can get that extra attention. We can kind of drive that accountability. So that's one thing we can do. But we also, I mean, we have guides on how to write a letter to the editor, how to file an OCR complaint, how to file, how to run for school board, questions to ask your teacher so you don't go in and have your hot mic moment.
Yeah.
And my coworkers are on the phone or emailing with parents all day, every day, talking them through things. And it's not, we're not trying to push people into doing things that they're uncomfortable with. We're trying to meet them where they are. Because, I mean, how you fight and what the problems are different in Tulsa versus Taos. And so this is not a one-size-fits-all solution. But we want people to feel that they can do something, that they have a little bit of ownership over this process. We decided very on that we didn't want to have chapters. I've been in Washington for long enough that I've seen groups with chapters fizzle out. Michelle and I have seen campus activism, right? And you see how the different leadership turnover really affects these organizations. But at the end of the day, I don't want people to think, well, Nikki and DC will fix this. I want people to feel that they have skin in the game. And also, I mean, we also know that state legislators and local officials pay more attention when it's somebody from their state, when it's their constituents, when it's someone from their neighborhood, instead of being the terrifying conservatives from the Beltway. So we encourage people to start their own parent groups. I mean, some of these are just, it's moms with a closed Facebook group, just sharing information and articles back and forth. They're not all formal organizations, but in the past 2 years, we now work with almost 250 groups across the country that have sprung up specifically to work on politics in school. Not on COVID-related things, not on school choice, specifically just on politics. I mean, people are really coming out of the woodwork, which is so fascinating. And they have this confidence, and they find their tribe. I mean, and we have seen this used to great effect, obviously, in Virginia, where there's terrific activism in Loudoun, there's terrific activism in Fairfax, and people were able to lean on each other. I mean, it is, and I'm sure some of you have been involved in these issues, it's hard, right? I mean, you get the hate mail, and you get the nasty comments publicly. That's unpleasant, and so sometimes, you want to lean out. But if you have a couple other people, then they can lean in for you. And so that idea of kind of finding your tribe is something we really encourage people to do. And what is so interesting to me is, I mean, as we have seen in Virginia and we are seeing across the country, the kinds of people who care about this issue, this is not like a right-wing Tea Party issue.
Yeah.
I mean, we have first-generation Americans who come to us. We have teachers who come to us. I mean, probably 10% of what we get are people who say, I'm a lifelong Democrat, but I hate this stuff. I got an email this morning from somebody saying, I have been a gay and lesbian activist for 20 years, and this transgender stuff is out of control.
Yeah.
It's fascinating to me. I mean, the kinds of unusual coalitions that are being formed because people are just so fed up. And so we want to empower these people. We want to plug them in together because they've never heard of the Heritage Foundation. They've never heard of the State Policy Network. But there is this terrific network of people that we can plug you into because guess what? If they've taken over your schools, what do you think they're doing in your city? What do you think they're doing in your state? What do you think the federal government's doing with your money? I mean, there are so many different iterations of this. And so we want to give these people a voice. And I do feel, I mean, again, with so many of our tips coming in and people wanting to be anonymous, we do want to give a voice to the voiceless. Because we have found that as people they send us things and we'll let them know when it goes out. They'll share it in their Facebook group or their patch.com. And then we have other people from those neighborhoods come out to us and say that that's not the only thing that's going on. That was actually how we were able to build our lawsuit against Wellesley, Massachusetts. We got a tip that the school had maintained racially segregated affinity groups. Affinity groups are this new thing where we'll have all the Asian kids meet together, we'll have all the black kids meet together. But Wellesley actually, they explicitly said, if you are white, do not attend. And Judicial Watch filed, so I filed an OCR complaint, again, with the Department of Education, which they could not get off their desk fast enough. And all these other people from the town started reaching out to us, and they passed on other tips and other tips. Judicial Watch filed a FOIA, and they found that they'd also turned away a teacher from the event. The school's, or the district's director of diversity lamented that she could not sort students by race. They didn't have details in that because she wanted to specifically invite people based on their skin color. And so we pulled all this together, filed a lawsuit. As Michelle said, we're structured as a membership association. So when we sue, it's parents defending education versus a district instead of being Nikki Michelle versus a district. People are very scared to have their names involved in this. And so that anonymity is very important. And one thing that we have found in the higher ed setting also is that universities will just wait students out. The lawyers I work with are the lawyers that are doing the Harvard affirmative action case. And that case was initially filed in 2014. It's only getting to the Supreme Court this year. If that was just an individual student, I mean, unless you have somebody who is a super duper 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 senior, they're gone. You know, and schools bank on that. They leverage this thing called standing. If you're not being harmed anymore, then the lawsuit's thrown out.
Yes.
As an association, as long as we always have a student, or in this case, you know, families that are enrolled in the district, our harm is ongoing. So our cases can go on indefinitely. And so we're able to do the anonymity. We're able to do kind of get around this whole standing trap. But really, you know, nail these people on what they are doing. And because so many of them are just, they're so used to working and operating with impunity behind the scenes. One thing that fascinated me was, I mean, as I got into this, you know, having worked in kind of general policy for a long time and then working in higher ed, I always knew that the public school system wasn't great. I always knew that the teachers' unions were bad. But I did not realize that the education system was as captured as it is. I mean, I would never have thought that the National School Board Association was evil. I would never thought that the Superintendent Association, the math teachers, the it's, you name it, and they're out there using your tax dollars against you, advocating for these really destructive policies. About 2 weeks ago, it was National School Counselor Week. We did a little bit of digging into their website. The National School Counselors, as well as the National School Nurses Association, as well as the National School Psychologists Association, they're all on the gender affirmation train. And this is, I mean, when we started Speech First, PDE last year, almost everything that we got in was related to race. This year, probably 30 or 40% of what we get in these days is related to gender identity. Schools pushing extremely toxic, age inappropriate, highly controversial materials on children, starting as early, I mean, kindergarten, pre-K, and people are horrified by this. I mean, we're seeing districts across the country maintaining policies where I think there was one in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. They said parents do not have a right to know their child's gender identity. There are districts that have 2 separate sets of medical records. In California, they're referring kids to medical clinics for hormone therapy without parental consent, and really appalling things that are taking place. And so, I mean, we think back to what happened in Virginia. You know, I mean, Terry McCall is saying, well, parents don't, you know, have a right to be involved. I saw so many people call it a gaffe, and I think, this is not a gaffe. I mean, you just let the mask slip, because there are so many people in this world who think that, you know, we're the experts. We know better than you do. We saw the Michigan Democratic Party put up a Facebook post and then take it down really quickly once it was screenshotted, that they said, you know, public schools are for public education and, you know, and for the public good. Who determines what the public good is? They do. And that's why, I mean, Asura calls it the mama bear revolution, right? These are all these people who have come out of the woodwork for the first time. I mean, so many of these people, I say it's their first rodeo. They're not professionals, but they have been driven out and motivated by this attack on the family, attack on their, you know, on this relationship between parent and child. I think back to when I was growing up, and it was very, we worked together. Maybe I got in trouble once in a while. And the principal would call me in, and they would try to work, you know, talk to my mom. Let me get Nikki back on track, you know, let's work together, let's come up with a plan. But now we see schools where it's a very adversarial relationship. We're working against the family. And that's deeply troubling. I mean, you know, there's, Katie and I were at a meeting on Tuesday about gender issues, and there's a terrific woman in Rhode Island named Nicole Neily, and she was just curious about what the curriculum was. And she said, you know, can I get a copy of it? Just curious about some of these things. They said, file a public records request. And I mean, how dismissive that is, right? We all know, it doesn't matter what the letter is next to your name, children do better when parents are involved, period.
Yes.
And they're keeping us away. They're holding us at arm's length. I'm still not able to go into my children's elementary school because of COVID. And so, you know, how am I able to help to supplement reading? You know, if I knew you were doing a lesson on this thing, maybe we'd have a special dinner about it. We could watch a movie about it. I want to help. But they don't want us involved. They don't want us to help. And that is, you know, that has really kind of brought up this kind of like animalistic instinct. You know, we want to protect our youth, our young. And it was, to me, the question was, what would happen? I mean, is this moving? Does it have staying power? I mean, many of us saw the Tea Party movement fizzle out years ago. And that's something that keeps me up at night. How do we keep this from fizzling out? How do we keep this kind of enthusiasm and energy from fizzling out? And I think, you know, the good news, the bad news is, the bad guys are not going to stop overreaching on this issue. They're not going to, right? There's so much money wrapped up in this. One report that Asura released last year was about the diversity consultants that are, spending our tax dollars, coming in as equity consultants, diversity consultants. Yeah. I mean, you know, they'll come and they'll do an equity audit, like we saw in Loudoun County. 100% of the time, you're always evil, you're always racist. I mean, my father's a Buddhist. At least with Buddhism, you can achieve enlightenment, but with diversity stuff, never, you can't. But their solution then is always, pay me and hire us in perpetuity, and then you'll be a little bit less awful.
Yeah.
It's a shakedown. I mean, we have to call it out for what it is. Asura filed hundreds of public records requests. I mean, we identified over 125 consultants and counting, operating in hundreds of districts across the country, making millions of dollars a year, sowing division, pushing hatred. And in many cases, they're not vetted, they're not background checked. I mean, for me to even be a room mother, I have to go through fingerprinting and background check. If you want to install a toilet in a public school, you have to go through a whole RFP process and show that it works. Not with these guys. I mean, there's no oversight of this industry, and as I call myself a recovering libertarian, I'm generally averse to regulation, but I mean, this is the Wild West, what these people are doing. And so there's so much bad out there, but we don't want to overwhelm people, because there are horror stories. Again, we have so many tips coming in from across the country. But I guess the good news is the cavalry is coming. I mean, you look at the polling on all of these issues. It crosses racial lines. It crosses political lines. It crosses sex lines. I mean, people are mad about this, and they're not going away. When schools reopened in September, I thought, well, is this going to be kind of an out of sight, out of mind issue? It's like, oh my gosh, like that was a nightmare, but like we're moving on, let's get on with our lives. And we found that if anything, parents were more hysterical, more worked up in September than they were when schools were shut down even, because now they had no idea.
Yeah.
And they were very much, dismissed, told to stay away. These elected officials, school board members, who are saying, I don't work for you, they're not going away. And so, we have a lot of work to do, like don't get me wrong, but these, parents are fired up and we're not going away. And so I think there is, at the end of the day, there is tremendous cause for hope. So I look forward to working with all of you to affect a lot of change, because there's a lot of work to be done. But with that, I guess I look forward to having a great conversation with you.
Thank you. We have a microphone here.
You have to come up and speak
Oh.
into the mic.
If you don't mind, we have a wired mic for now, if you wouldn't mind coming. But let me ask first.
Yeah. Oh, moderator's
Because
privilege.
I know some of these people here know it, but I don't think everybody who watched this will know. Give us the details of an equity audit and what they're actually doing to our children's benefit.
Sure, yeah, so they'll come in, it's kind of like a rigged system, right? They'll come in, they'll look at statistics and say, well, you're disciplining children at different rates, and they'll say, well, obviously this is a sign that you're racist. Well, I mean, it's not necessarily, and we see all of the kind of the racial overlay in policies. There are lots of other reasons for disparities in our education system, and saying that everything is related to race, I think, actually does a tremendous disservice to our children and to our education policies, because there are socioeconomic factors, there are family factors, but why do we want to, looking at kind of like the war on merit, the war on excellence, and TJ and stuff, why is the answer always to hold people down? Why is it never to, provide remedial programs to lift people up?
Yes.
And so, but with the equity audits, they'll come in and it's a predetermined conclusion. So they'll run through, they'll interview people. We see a lot of the surveys that are being done in schools through companies like Panorama Education. They're loaded questions. I worked as a pollster. I mean, you know how you set questions up. Do you feel that people treat you badly based on your skin color? I mean, how is a kid supposed to answer that, right? These are not neutrally worded. And that's, I think, a big concern for a lot of parents is, well, you ask these questions that are loaded, you get the answer you want, and then it gives you cover to do more spending and more programming. Where you're not actually evaluating facts in the ground and asking real probing questions. And at the end of the day, what are the problems you want to solve? And is this the best way to go about it? And so I think, again, if you were to go in and propose some other program, you'd have to submit an RFP, there'd be metrics, did we meet this at the end of the year? None of these things are part of the whole equity audit process. And again, there's 5, 6, 7-figure contracts. Is that money better spent on doing other things in our schools to lift children up and to give children greater education opportunities? Our children have faced such astonishing learning loss over the past 2 years. And that compounds, already, frankly, very, very low proficiency levels in many, many districts. We're not addressing that, right? Today is actually International SEL Day. SEL stands for Social Emotional Learning. This is just it's the Trojan horse for getting a lot of these policies into schools, because it's cover for, let's get inside your child's head. And so, that's a tremendous concern as well, because you have 7 hours a day with my child. I want my child to read, I want my child to write, I want my child to learn math. But you're not doing that because half the day is spent on emotional and bullying and gender issues, and my children are not thriving in that environment, and most other people aren't. And then when you start to tell people, children to identify themselves based on immutable characteristics, on sex, on race. Kids will start to will internalize that, and they'll start to feel bad about themselves, and they'll start to view, treat others accordingly. That's not the way that we heal this country. That's the way that we destroy this country. And so it's a tremendous concern because the equity audits are it's a cover for inserting a lot of these programming. They say it's evidence-based and statistic-based, but I mean, they're goosing the numbers, and I think it's, we have to call them on that.
Right. If you would give your name and affiliation, and then anybody else who has questions, come get the mic.
Okay. I'm Mike Doherty. I'm affiliated with the Justice Society, which I founded. My question, can you give a little bit of an overview about the Thomas Jefferson litigation, the turning point that turned into a win for us, and how you think that's going to reverberate moving forward?
Sure. So this, we have like experts in the room. I'm just like a surrogate for my coworkers who are involved with the Coalition for TJ. So the admissions for Thomas Jefferson, which has been considered the #1 high school in the country, magnet school, very difficult to test into, rigorous academic application process. It was funny, I was in Great Wolf Lodge with my kids last weekend with a friend, and she said, under the current, like what the district Fairfax tried to change it to, she said, I would have qualified for it. I was in the top 1.5%. She said, I should not have been at Thomas Jefferson. But Thomas Jefferson was determined by the powers that be in Fairfax County to have the wrong racial makeup. There were too many Asians. That's what we're seeing in New York City right now. That's part of our litigation against New York City. That it's the wrong mix of people. It's not representative of the county. Again, I mean, it's race blind. It's merit based in terms of applications. You have to have taken a set of courses. You have to have had a certain GPA. Once you sort of make it past the initial screening process, then there's an essay, there's a test, and there are people who work very, very hard to get in. I mean, there is a goal for this, and there's a reason why many immigrant families, make an effort to get in. But again, Fairfax County School Board felt it was the wrong racial mix, and so they wanted to change that. And through the litigation, a group of parents, well, they forced through a bunch of changes, very much behind, under cover of darkness, all of which came out in the course of discovery, the kind of emails back and forth between the district and the board members, the text messages saying, wow, this is really hurting Asians, LOL. Really kind of grotesque things. They knew what they were doing, and they were trying to figure out how do we weight certain characteristics, just like we saw at Harvard, right? I mean, moving to a holistic, to a kind of personality-based evaluation of students so that we can change the mix of students that are in. The group of parents banded together, they formed the Coalition for TJ, and then they were represented by a nonprofit organization called Pacific Legal Foundation that sued them in federal court on alleging racial discrimination. About 2 weeks ago, they got a decision from the district court, Claude Hilton in the Eastern District of Virginia, who said that yes, there was racial animus that went into the decision-making process, and he granted them what is called a preliminary injunction, which said you can't use this process that they used for the 2021-22 school year going forward. And he kind of signaled, even during kind of the arguments, he said, do you have a backup plan for this if this whole thing falls through? And they were like, no, they were so confident in themselves. So they now, I just got a text when I was on the way over here that the district applied for a stay. They wanted to kind of overturn the judge's orders to keep doing, because now they're trying to admit next year's class, keep going back to what they were doing. And the judge said, no. I mean, like, what? No. And I think, with that in mind, and then keeping an eye on what's going to happen in the Supreme Court in October with Harvard, people have tried to be a little too cute, right? We're trying to affect race without really affecting race. And I mean, I think when, was it the Grutter decision, when Justice O'Connor wrote that it was, 25 years, it's been more than 25 years. And if anything, I mean, Speech First filed an amicus brief, we're going to do another one for the Harvard one, showing that, the whole intention of allowing this sort of like, this kind of gamesmanship was to increase diversity on campus. Fine, you might have diversity of skin color, but have you increased diversity of thought whatsoever? No. I mean, you look at polling from FIRE, from the Knight Foundation, from Pew, people are chilled. Students are terrified. There is an on-campus orthodoxy, and the same thing is happening in our K-12 schools. And so it was the Thomas Jefferson, it was a terrific victory in kind of like a localized battle, but this war is going to continue because it's not just TJ and it's not just Harvard. We saw this in Boston Latin, another terrific, highly competitive school. They tried to change their admissions process, again, to knock out Asians. The Lowell School in San Francisco, that was part of the reason that the San Francisco School Board was recalled. That was not a big Republican issue, right? That's not a Republican town. But again, it's immigrant families who say, I moved to this town so that I could get my kid, my child could try to get into this school. What are you doing? When we try and tear people down and, get rid of, this is something that Northam did, and that, if we had government call-offs, definitely would have. Eliminating advanced math classes in the name of equity, right? If the wrong people are special, then no one can be special.
Yeah.
That is, our country will not compete in a global marketplace with that mindset. Again, we have to try and lift people up and figure out how do we fill in the gaps, not how do we hold everybody down so you're all at the same level.
Questions? Anybody else? Don't be shy. Just.
Hi, I'm Julie Balance and I work for Hillsdale College. I'm concerned because you're right, we don't want to bring people down so everyone is equal, but what programs do we have to lift people up? Because there is a disparate impact on people who have lower socioeconomic status. They can't afford to send their kids to private school, they can't pull their kids out and move to a different county. So what do we do for them?
Yeah, I think one thing that would be very helpful for a lot of people would be school choice. Not trapping people by their zip code in failing schools. And so I think that's one thing that can help. I always tell people, I think school choice has to be paired with transparency. Because I could move my kid, we have the money to put our kid in a private school, but what if I put them in and it's even worse than the first place they were? That's kind of worthless. And if you have transparency without having the choice, okay, I know that my school stinks, and I know that school is better, but I don't have the money to move or do anything about it. And so I think in my mind, that has to be kind of the 1-2 punch. It's not illegal, it's not unconstitutional to target programs based on socioeconomic status. It is illegal to target programs based on race. And I think that's what we've seen schools do. And so, we can help people based on a number of factors, but we can't say, okay, the Asian kids get this special program and the black kids get that special program. And so we have to discourage, at least, with our public tax dollars, organizations and schools from doing things like that. And if private foundations and private charities want to do programs based on race, that's their prerogative. And certainly we see many of them that do. But it's when it's being done with our tax dollars, that's when it starts to become unconstitutional.
Donna Wadowski, former law enforcement, longtime Virginia resident. Youngkin, I think it was in the paper yesterday, had every superintendent of public schools in the state of Virginia question his equity program. Well, he dismissed all equity inclusion staff on by the Secretary of Education, right? Mm-hmm. What can they do? What can a superintendent do other than voice a complaint?
Yeah, I saw that and I was talking to some coworkers about it because, there is something that smells a little bit fishy about it because, what we saw with the National School Board Association. They put out this horrific memo calling for federal intervention, and I asked all the state chapters. I personally emailed all of the state chapters and I said, did you sign off on this? And they all were like, no. And we think this is a local issue, this is a state issue, this is not a federal issue. And so I wonder if there's an element of some of this being sent out by the Virginia Superintendents Association without everyone buying in. And so I was talking to a coworker, I was like, do I want to FOIA 119 of them? Not really, but so I think people should start to ask questions of them. At the end of the day, I think also, there's a lot of virtue signaling, right? And so this is the association. Can they actually do something about it? No. Do they, as a superintendent, have the force of law to overturn the governor? No. And so I think it was sort of just like a little bit of sound and noise.
But the Virginia Department of Education, the doctor, I forget her name, she has the power to dismiss the superintendent of a school that she doesn't agree with, correct?
I am not 100% positive about that because every state is different and I am trying to do it. But definitely the school boards do. And so, I would not be surprised if some downstate districts, because, the superintendents always try to give out the impression that they run the show. Yeah. They are accountable to the school board. And so, we saw in, was it Spotsylvania County, where this school board fired their superintendent. And so, I wouldn't be surprised if we start to see some house cleaning of some of these superintendents later on.
We have house cleaning in Loudon ongoing right now. But anyway, thank you.
Yeah, no, they're bad actors. And actually one thing related to the National School Board Association, No one really knew that a week before that letter went to President Biden, the American Association of Superintendents did a joint letter with the National School Board Association saying, we're very concerned about violence and threats at school, in schools. And so 2 weeks ago, I sent FOIAs to every single board member of the Superintendent Association, figuring out, what'd you say about this? And did you talk to Catherine Lehman? And did you talk to Kristen Clark? And did you talk to Merrick Garland or Cardona? Like, what is sort of the genesis of this? Because you guys have flown under the radar, and you are just as bad, if not worse, than the School Board Association. So, TBA, a lot of them are dragging their feet. I filed an appeal with the district this morning because they're ignoring my FOIAs. But
well, that's good. Glad someone's helping.
yeah, no, they're bad guys, and you know what? There's a target-rich environment. There's a lot of bad guys out there, but the good thing is that they're all when they work for a school district and work for the state. They're state actors, they're state employees. So their correspondence, their text messages, their emails, you guys can get them. I encourage all of you to get it, it's lots of fun.
Yeah.
And they will try and throw barriers, and they'll try and say, oh, well, it's gonna take so long, and it's gonna take, I'll take email copies, I'll take double-sided, give them a narrow date range, give them a set of search terms, but get out there and start digging, because, there is gold to be had.
Yes.
Cora Wack, I am the assistant to the vice president of Policy Promotion, Bridget Wagner at Heritage. You talked a lot about how this is a problem that is very widespread, and that you didn't realize how widespread it was until recently. But I'm wondering, because I talked to some of my friends who attended public school, and they're kind of like, I don't know, I thought it was okay, like none of this stuff that we're hearing about now. But you hear the horror stories, and I think, I don't know, is this really everywhere, or are these cases just kind of all concentrated in big cities with like liberal mayors and stuff? Because I went to private school my whole life, and I didn't really know public school, and now I hear all about this, so I'm like, oh, is this something I would even want to consider like sending my kid to in the future? And I just kind of want to hear a little bit more about how widespread throughout America this is, and how concentrated it is.
Yeah, we have on our website, we have tips in all 50 states, so definitely it's everywhere, right? It's just if there are things in Texas, just like there are things in New York State. And again, private schools, like we had a bunch of stuff out of a Jesuit school in the Chicago suburbs, and so it's in parochial schools too. I think the Southern Poverty Law Center says they have 500,000 educators within their network for their teaching tolerance program.
Oh.
You don't build up numbers like that after George Floyd. You are working at building numbers like that for 40 years. And so there has been a really significant, long-standing effort to put some of this into schools for a long time. So I think, it's coming from a lot of places, so it's, that's sort of the reason there's not like one kill shot on this. Again, domestic terrorist, obviously, I have to use terms like that. There are some crazy teachers. Some of you might have seen that the Twitter account Libs of TikTok. Some of these people, and they're unabashed about it. You can't watch me 8 hours a day with your child. They're proud about what they're doing. They feel that it is their mission to deprogram children from the values that they have at home. You gross Catholics with your belief in traditional marriage. So there's the teachers that are crazy, and some of them are getting that from their teaching colleges, schools of education, right, where they're getting that. Some of the districts, it's in their professional development programs. My kids are in school, they're off of school twice a month for professional development days. And so they have this stuff fed to them, the teachers do, as part of their kind of ongoing training that they need. Some of it's coming from the school boards, like we saw in Fairfax County. Some of it's coming from the state, New York State, state of California, California's Healthy Youth Act. And so it's kind of coming from all over. And so I think you might be, and we have a ton of information out of Florida even. Florida has a great governor, they have very active, tons of local parent groups, great school choice, and there are still problems there too. Katie and I met a woman on Tuesday who, her daughter was transitioned behind her back. She had no idea. Again, schools maintaining these different sets of medical records, and it's all done in the name of safety, right? We want to keep children safe. You're trying to keep my kids safe from me? How dare you? How dare you make that implication? And so unfortunately, it is everywhere. But, it's that saying the price of liberty is eternal vigilance. I think people are now realizing that it probably is here, and if it's not here, then I need to keep an eye on things so that if we start to see smoke signals, that we can nip that in the bud. And there have been successes. I try very hard to not, I don't want to just tell sob stories and horror stories to parents and crush their spirits and have people pull their kids out into the woods. There have been little victories. I mean, parents that have gone to their school board and said, I don't want this diversity contractor in our district. What can we cancel this? Like, can we just redirect these funds? And some districts had said, I had no idea people didn't like this. Yeah, okay, yeah, cool, great, done. We have seen recalls, we have seen new people elected, and so, the tide is shifting. It's not gonna happen overnight, but, I mean, there is real commitment to affecting change, and organizations being built. I was talking to somebody about 2 weeks ago, he said, we wanna help the newly elected school boards have the programming they need, because, they'll talk to their school, the district's general counsel, and say, we have to have transgender bathrooms. And they need countervailing legal advice. And so, the fact that new organizations are being created to fill this void, I think, is very exciting. So it's a very dynamic space.
Michelle, can I squeeze in one more question?
Sure.
Okay.
One more, yep, one more. Next month, we'll have a mic that we can pass around.
All right. I'm Elizabeth Hensley. I worked for more years than I'd like to say in human resources and organization development, and saw such a shift over in the past years to DEI, and actually left because of that, because I couldn't take it any longer. But what do you think, so it's so prevalent, what you're seeing in the school system, and it sounds like all the players are involved in this major strategy. So what's the end game? Why are they doing it? Because it's clearly doing damage, but it's benefiting someone, it's benefiting a cause. What do you see as the end game for all of this in the schools?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to be conspiratorial, right? We have friends that are like, this is like the critical race theory is, Marxist origins, and yes, there definitely is an overlay of that. I mean, I was telling my husband, who is bless his heart, I said, well, there's people who are working on abolitionist education. He's like, why do you not want them to learn about Harriet Tubman? I was like, that's not it. Abolitionist education is this kind of gaslighting term where we want to abolish society, right? We want to defund the police, we want to do all these things. We want to, defund and delegitimize capitalism and all these crazy things. And so I think there is an element of that, right? We want to reprogram, it's a money grab, it's a power grab. And if we can get your children very onto the gender ideology train, if we can get your kids very into the identity politics thing, then it's easier to redirect people's resources, tax dollars, get them to vote a certain way, and so it kind of keeps their gravy train going. And we are kind of we are the watchers on the wall, right? We're the ones who have to protect our family because they don't have our children or our family's best interest at heart whatsoever. And so it's daunting because there are so many bad guys, but at the end of the day, we have the majority of the American people on our side. Not everybody, because we still did see Arlington and Fairfax and Loudoun still vote, higher than I would like for McAuliffe, but, our work's cut out for us, but I think we will win.
I think we'll win too. The work you're doing is so wonderful, helping parents. I like when you said we teach them get smart quickly. Parents are so busy, working and families and caring for their parents and their children and all, so it's a wonderful service that you're doing, and we're so grateful to you for coming, for telling about it. And a lot of people will be watching this and learning about it. And I have a gift for you. See that book? I have a signed copy for you.
Oh, thank you.
You have a
daughter. I have a daughter.
And I'm sure you could write a lot of what's in here. But the reason I wrote this is after 29 years at Clare Boothe Lewis, primarily working with young women in college. We do CWN, we love doing this as well. But people would say to me, how do these young women get to college and they're smart and they're gracious and they're courageous and they're conservative? And I noticed over the years things that went on in their lives, things that their parents, their grandparents, people that work with them did to help them. And so I wrote a book. It's called How to Raise a Conservative Daughter. And as I said, you probably know a lot of what's in here. But I inscribed it to you. I give it to you with my thanks.
Thank you.
And it's so special to have you for our first time back after 2 years.
It's such an honor.
As usual, we have a lunch for you, and because this was our first resumption after 2 years, I made you all a chocolate cake last night. I made it. Cut the pieces small. You can all have it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so
Such an
much.
honor.
What a
Thank
wonderful
you.
talk. Thank you.